Hello and welcome to Just One More Mod. I haven't done one of these videos in a while, so I thought I'd come back today with my most comprehensive and complicated mod video to date. I did one on the SKX at the beginning of last year. I swapped out the Hardlex for domed sapphire crystal and the aluminium bezel insert for a Lumed ceramic bezel insert on my SKX 013. But today I'm going all in on a 007. Both of those mods, so sapphire and ceramic, but I'm also adding a Strapcode Jubilee, changing the hands, changing the bezel, and the big one, the movement swap, dumping the underperforming 7S26, replacing it with a hacking and hand winding Seiko NH36 movement instead. Now, this is going to challenge me. This is beyond my modding ken thus far anyway. I'm going to have to resize a crown stem, which is new, and I'm also going to have to effect a date wheel swap on these two Seiko movements, involving a couple of fiddly little clips. So it's going to be a bit of an adventure today for both of us. Before I start though, a few thank yous are in order. First and foremost, thank you to Alex from Crystaltimes Horology. He supplied most of the parts today, including the watch, the movement, the double dome sapphire crystal, and the bezel. Now, he sent me all of these parts about a year ago, and I haven't been able to pluck up the courage thus far to do the mods. So sorry Alex, I took my sweet time about this one, but I hope it's going to be worth it. Thanks also to Carlos from Lumed Ceramic Bezel Inserts. He sent me a You Can Guess. Harold from Yobokies, he provided the hands today at cost, and Strapcode even gave me a tiny bit of a discount on that Jubilee bracelet. Alright, I've had a large cup of coffee, let's get on with it. Alright, I'm now talking over the top of my edited footage. I got as much of this mod on camera as possible. Some of the really fiddly bits I had to do off camera though, it just wouldn't have worked. So here is our base unit today. Common or Garden SKX 007 on the fairly hideous rubber strap. I guess if you're really going to beat the watch for a long time, you should get the rubber, but otherwise I just don't see the point. I'm a Jubilee guy all the way. Hardlex crystal, there's a small scratch on this. Hardlex, surely one of the most overrated materials in the entire watch community. Aluminium bezel insert, standard bezel, pretty standard ordinary looking SKX at this point, but not for long. Right, here's what I'm going to put on this one today, starting with a Strapcode Jubilee. I just went for the standard Jubilee, not the Angus. I didn't want to add too much weight. Now that's an ST37 from Crystaltimes. BAR stands for Blue Anti-Reflective Coating. A Lumed Ceramic Bezel Insert from Lumed Ceramic Bezel Inserts. And those 1521 Squale style hands from Yobokies. That is an NH36, a fresh one, including a long stem there, which I'm going to have to trim. That is a crown appropriate to the SKX. And in the final bag here we have a new bezel and a crown that I'm not going to use. There's also a chapter ring. Alex was kind enough to supply a metal chapter ring, but I don't think I'm going to use that. Now, tools wise, you've seen most of this before. Nothing too flash, everything pretty much basic on eBay. Those $2 case back removers are great, as are the Presto hand pullers. Now, I've gone from a hand pusher to these things, again pretending to be Bergeon, cheap Chinese made. I think I paid about $30 for them. The old crystal press and a whole bunch of dies has served me well prior to this point. Now, a whole bunch of screwdrivers, couple of tweezers there, including one actual decent pair. The iSesamo I didn't end up using. We've got a little, yes, that's the one I did end up using, the case back removal tool. That is a specific to the Seiko range of movements movement holder, little movement pad. The old Bergeon 6767, I've got a case for the movement holder as well, polishing cloth where appropriate, and a loop. I've never really used a loop before. Patek Philippe, I wonder where I got that one, Mr. X. And a puffer, again another $2 job from eBay. All this very basic equipment I've gathered over the last couple of years. GS Hypo Cement, now that I can recommend. Hypodermic syringe glue, I'm going to glue the bezel on, and gloves, I'm going to put them on nice and early today. So we shall start by taking the strap off, taking the original rubber off. I'm going to speed up here when it takes me a while to do stuff. Pretty basic stuff, you shouldn't have difficulties with this. Next up, we're going to take the case back off. Again, these $2 tools are excellent, I find. Bit of extra purchase there with that gripping tool. No problems at all getting the case back off this one. I think I've had it off in the past to have a look, make sure everything was going to go well for me today. Now, to remove the crown from these, you pull it in, you pull the crown out into the movement wind position. There's a little lever and it just pops straight out. Very, very simple. Next thing to do is to remove the movement itself. Now I'm just going to manipulate the little plastic movement holder. I'm going to take the rubber seal out of the case first, pop that to one side. I shall pop it back in later on. So I'm going to manipulate that little black movement holder here and the whole thing should just pop out. I'm going to flop the whole movement, dial, hands, etc. right onto that little case, and then I'm going to cover it with a dust cover and set it to one side until I need it later. Alright, so a little bit of protective tape over the lugs, one particular lug, whichever one you fancy, in order to remove this bezel. I've got that case back removal tool, pry that underneath, a little pop, and it comes off quite straightforward. That one, not too much difficulty. Make sure you put plenty of tape though, otherwise you will scratch those lugs. Now I'm going to push the Hardlex crystal up, away from the dial if you will. This one took a couple of goes, there just wasn't quite enough purchase on my crystal press. I had to adjust them, put in a couple of different dies. I did get a satisfying pop though as this one removed, and there we are, it came straight out, taking the chapter ring and the seal, the gasket seal of the crystal with it. All pretty good, didn't break anything, which is always a relief. It makes quite a noise, you think you've broken it, but no problems at all. So I'm going to take the gasket seal off that Hardlex and transfer it onto my new piece of Crystaltimes Sapphire crystal, Swiss made artificial sapphire there. They do a whole bunch of these. This is kind of like the one that comes with the SKX, quite an angle. Double domed, but it is got a little bit of a bevel edge to it as well. Blue anti-reflective coating, you can get that with purple, you can get it with clear coat, you can get it with no AR crystal if you want to go a little bit retro. But this is the one I was sent by Crystaltimes, so this is the one that's going into the watch today. Now the gloves are on, I'm going to make sure I don't touch that crystal at all so I don't get any smudges on the underside. There's the old and the new side by side, and you can already see that the light is going to reflect off that sapphire crystal in a much more pleasant manner than it did the Hardlex. So popping the gasket seal on, I'm just going to put that one finger tight, and then I'm going to set it in the case again finger tight before I put it into the die, the press. Now the chapter ring, I could have glued that, but this was a good one, so I'm not going to bother. There's a little notch on the chapter ring, aligning with a notch at roughly where the 12 is. You can see that there before I put it in. There's a little notch at the 12. So I'm going to pop it in, spin it round, make sure that is nicely seated, and that'll do for the day. I have glued them in the past, but this time I didn't feel particularly that there was the need for it. Now, gasket in place, crystal in place. I'm just going to hand push that one in prior to using the die press. Now selecting carefully the dies, small one, applying even pressure from the top, give it a twist. This one took a couple of pops, but again there was a very satisfying press noise. It seated very well indeed. I was 100% happy with this. Now obviously the watch is not going to be 200 meter air divers ISO certified anymore, but I feel confident with that crystal. It's gone in very nicely, no problems at all there. I'd be happy taking this one into the swimming pool, which is about the limit of my wet water exploits in the future. Now, new bezel, look at that coin edge bezel, all stainless steel. This is a Crystaltimes proprietary part. You can see the difference between the old one. I think it's going to make a nice cosmetic difference, and it's going to be easier to grip as well. Now I just lined it up, CTSS, again a nice little etching there for you, underneath where the bezel insert is going to go. Now I tried to push it in by hand, but I didn't get the snap that I was looking for, so I decided to use that crystal press again a different set of dies and a little bit of a squeeze, and I got a nice satisfying pop. So that bezel is seated very, very nicely there. Next up, hand removal. Now something I didn't show you at the beginning, I've got a little Bergeon dial protector. I bought a pack of 3 of these a while ago. You can make your own out of a poly bag if you so choose. Presto hand remover, again a couple of dollars. So called because, hey presto, it removes all three hands at once. Being careful not to scratch the dial or bend the hands. Perhaps they will appear, those SKX hands with their cracking Lumed bright, perhaps they will appear on a Chinese special in the future. You never know your luck. Now, getting the dial off, a couple of pins on either side. They're not screwed in, these SKX dials. Just look for a screwdriver sized indent on either side. Get a flathead in there, give it a little push, making sure you don't push more on one side than the other so that it comes off cleanly and you don't bend those dial pins. That would give you a problem putting them back in. That's it. Once you've got a little bit of a gap on either side, you can get your fingernails under there or a screwdriver and it just flops up. Very, very easy to remove the dial. And that's it, revealing a naked 7S26. Now here's where I'm in uncharted waters. That's the 7S26 on the left and the NH36 on the right. I'm going to have to lose that Kenji day wheel though. I'm going to move the French dual English language one over, and I'm also going to move the movement holder over. Apparently you can use the NH36 one, but it goes better if you transfer the 7S26 one. Now this is the bit that I'm not looking forward to. Apparently you get a couple of little flat sharp screwdrivers underneath that clip in the middle, wedge it up and the clip pops off and you can then remove the day wheel. Turns out though it was much easier than I had thought. Two of my smallest screwdrivers, couple of 1mm screwdrivers, and I did it no problem at all. Managed not to bend that clip either, which is crucial. A little bit of blue tack and I was able to swiftly remove the day wheel from the 7S26 and set it to one side for transfer onto the NH36. So here's the NH36. I've got the little clip off that one as well. And I'm using another piece of blue tack to do the day wheel swap. I'm then going to take the movement holders off of each and transfer them over. Now here's me putting the 7S26 day wheel onto the NH36. Took a minute or two to seat that one. You can roll it anti-clockwise and you will see and feel it drop into the cogs, meaning that you won't have any difficulties. I did obviously check that later on. It kind of looked like it had bent a little bit, the day wheel, but in reality, once I got the clip back on top of it, no problems at all. Now again, the clip goes on quite simply. I just popped it on the pinion and pushed it down with a set of tweezers, and again, it clipped in place. Easier than I thought, not something you should be too intimidated by, I don't think. And that's it. Job is a good one. Next up, the movement holders, popping the grey one. They're just on finger tight. There's a couple of clips on either side. Just with gloves, I popped the grey one off the 7S26, the black one off the NH36, and swapped the two of them over. It was a straight swap, no problem at all. So that is an NH36 with 7S26 day wheel and 7S26 movement holder to go back in the SKX. Now, just to check that everything was working as it should, here's one pull of the crown, rolling forward for the day, rolling backward for the date. This all seems to be good. Quite a relief that it worked as it should do. Okay then, popping the dial on the NH36, again just reversing the procedure, there's no screws, holding those feet in, lining it up nicely, give it a squeeze, on it goes, no problem at all there. And not that I'm paranoid or anything, but I had another go at the movement here, just making sure I hadn't disturbed the day or the date wheel before I went any further. Putting the hands on, because the hands, once you've committed to the hands, you're kind of stuck. What I also did was I rolled it over so the date changed bang on midnight. Here it is, almost there, coming from 13 to 14, click. So I'm going to take that as midnight and I'm going to align the hour hand vertically pointing to 12 there. Here we are, these little Yobokies hands, the 1521 hands they call them, all very nice indeed. There's a couple of different options. I could have gone for a paddle second hand, but I opted for this lollipop. I saw one on a Seiko Mod forum and I thought it looked great. These would just add a bit of a point of difference to this SKX build. Now, hands. Not that easy. I'm still not all that comfortable pushing hands on. Easier with those tools than with one of those cheap hand presses, I think anyway. They get more difficult as they go along. The hour hand's pretty straightforward. The minute hand gets more difficult and the second hand is a proper bugger if I'm being honest. Now I do these off screen though. You kind of get the idea. pick the right one of those little podger tools. Make sure that the circle, the hole cut out in the tool is large enough to cover the pinion, so you go from a large hole to a slightly smaller and then a slightly smaller one again as you work your way through the hands. And obviously I tested it every time just to make sure that the hand was seated nice and correctly. So with the hour hand seated correctly, I rolled it then down to the 6, meaning that I can then align the minute hand to the 12, meaning that all the hands are nicely aligned when the watch is built. So this one was a little fiddlier. I managed to do it off camera, but you get the idea. You use the appropriate tool and you give it a squeeze, but not so much of a squeeze that you bend the hands. I've done that before, believe me. Last but not least, and it's the second hand, I actually used the loop here just to make sure there were no little dust flecks and bits and pieces on the pinion or around those hands. I think I'd scratched the orange one a little bit. It's not visible from the naked eye, but just to clear all the little dust particles there. And once again, I'm checking that the hands don't foul each other and that the date does tick over at the 12 o'clock, and also that the movement does indeed hack and hand wind. I push the crown in. There we are, ticking over at the 12 o'clock. That all looks pretty good. Seiko movements always take a while for the day to roll over as well. But that's the date ticking over at 12, which is pretty good. And if I push the crown in, the second hand should start moving. Look at that. We have got a hacking and hand winding Seiko SKX. What's next? What's next is I'm going to put the movement into the case. I'm going to give the whole thing a good puffing out. I made sure there was no dust either on the dial or in the case on the underside of that crystal. I've been very careful not to smudge. Nothing worse than a fingerprint on the underside of a brand new piece of sapphire crystal. It's not that easy to get rid of them. You never quite get as good a finish as you do on a piece of virgin crystal, so I was very careful. Alright, that was the test crown that this NH36 came with. I removed that. And then basically just drop the movement straight into the case. Et voila, the movement is now in the case. So on to the new crown and crown stem. Crown stem and crown both supplied by Crystaltimes. Nowadays they offer them cut to size, but I got these from him so long ago that they weren't offering that service. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of work shortening this crown stem later on, but again it was easier than I had anticipated. So there it is, super long in the movement, just to make sure that the movement is all lined up before I go any further. I'm also going to pop in that gasket seal before I forget and put the case back on just to protect the movement while I insert the bezel insert. This is always quite a fun and satisfying job. Lumed ceramic bezel insert, LCBIstore.com. Now this is an SKX style one, so it doesn't fundamentally change the look of the watch in that regard. I've used LCBIs in a Samurai build and also my 013, highly recommended. They're not cheap, but they are great if you love your SKX and you're going to keep it long term. It just adds a little extra finishing touch. That's what it's going to look like. Just make sure it all lines up nicely in that new bezel. Now, I'm moving on to this. I'm going to stick it in using that GS Hypo cement. This cost me about $15 a couple of years ago. Highly recommended. I saw Mark from Long Island Watches using it and he knows what he's doing, that man, so I bought some on his recommendation. All the way around the bezel, I didn't go too crazy. You can wipe it off with Goo Gone, but I thought, don't make a mess, Jody, then you won't have to clean up the mess. So I put on certainly sufficient, but not overdone today. Now, making sure that the chapter ring lines up with the bezel. There we are. I glued it in, gave it a little squeeze left, a little shimmy right, and it all lines up perfectly. Better than it comes out of a Malaysian Seiko factory anyway. And that's it, looking pretty good. The head of the watch is pretty much done. I just got to cut this crown stem, size up the bracelet, and we're off. So, flipping the watch over to the case back, here is what we have to do. I'm going to pull that to the winding position. So I'm going to push it in there so it's just at the hand winding position. I'm going to have to cut off the difference between the crown tube and the crown so that in the winding position it is just beyond the crown tube, if you see what I mean. Now that distance there to that distance there. Now I measured it, then I measured it again, then I measured it a third time, and I measured it at about 8 millimeters. But I only have one crown, so I thought I would cut it at 7 millimeters. Better to cut it a couple of times than to cut it once too much, and then that would bugger up the whole project. So just over 8mm, I measured it to 7mm, and I used a Sharpie to blacken the end of the crown stem, as you'll see here in just a second. Pretty straightforward. I blackened the last 7mm of it, and then I brought in a pair of small snips. These seemed reasonable and they did a pretty good job. So that was my first attempt, snipped it no problem at all. Bit of a file just to smooth the ends off. Went back into that crown no problem at all. So this is my first attempt here, and as you will see in just a second, oh, I didn't quite cut enough off. It wouldn't grip to the crown tube. I ended up cutting it a further twice before I got it spot on. The second time was closer, but it didn't screw in all the way down. The crown didn't screw in all the way to the case. The third time I did it, I got it spot on. The crown screwed in all the way down to the case. No gaps at all. Absolutely perfect. So on to the final stretch here, the Strapcode Jubilee. I didn't want to add too much weight to already a fairly substantial watch, so I just went for the standard Jubilee. It's got a nice bit of flex, quite like the original, but you get a milled clasp, chamfered edges, fold overs, button security pushers, and a whole bunch of micro adjusts. You get solid end lengths and screw lengths. Very, very easy to install, and it fits a treat. Strapcode really do a good product. Now, what do you think? That is the finished article. I popped this one on Instagram. It has already been compared to Trigger's Broom, i.e. there's not a lot of original watch left. Case back, couple of seals, date wheel and the dial. Everything else is new. Kind of says a lot about the original Seiko SKX that if you really want to do a good job on it, you've got to chuck most of it in the bin. But overall, I am delighted. This was a bit of an adventure for me, cutting a crown stem for a start and also affecting that movement switch, transferring date wheels over, those little funny clips in the middle. Don't be intimidated. It wasn't nearly as difficult as I thought it was going to be. So have a crack, do it yourself, why not? Now, one concern when you're changing hands on a watch is the lume. How does the lume look like on this new SKX? Well, it looks pretty fantastic. Huge, bright green initial burst, thanks to that bezel insert in the hands. Bezel insert fades first. Seiko's Lumed Bright though, hanging on in there on the dial. Bit of a colour mismatch between the dial and the hands now, but the hands didn't disappoint. They last just as long as the Lumed Bright. They're quality hands from Yobokies and they're not cheap either, so good that the lume is up to snuff. Alright then, that's the voice over if you see what I mean, and I'm back. Just to summarise my thoughts about the SKX mods, my most ambitious mod project to date. How gorgeous does it look? I am really pleased with it. Pleased that I didn't bugger anything up, which is always a relief. Certainly that little clip in the middle wasn't quite as hard as I had told myself it was going to be, and neither was the crown stem. So again, this video isn't necessarily a how-to, it's a how I did it, and I encourage you all to have a crack. If I can do it, then I would imagine that you will all be able to do it just as well, if not better than me. So what, if anything, would I have done differently? Well, I'm not sure that the blue AR coating does much for this particular build. I think clear coat AR would have given it a more harmonious look overall, but hey, I didn't specify to Alex, he just sent me a whole bag of stuff and this is what he sent me. Looking forward to seeing how this Jubilee shapes up. Doesn't look fundamentally all that different to the Seiko one, which is great, and I didn't want to add too much weight. Does add a much nicer clasp, screw lengths and solid end lengths as well, so always a good job from Strapcode. And as you saw from the lume video, these Yobokies hands, the lume on them doesn't quite colour match, but it hangs on just as well as the Lumed Bright on the dial, which is quite a relief, I must say. Nothing worse than swapping hands on a watch and then the lume dies before the indices does. Very disappointing. Now the bezel action, I haven't talked about that yet. It is sturdy. Still the same spring clip as the original Seiko bezel, but obviously this one easier to grip because it's coin edge. Doesn't quite have that notchedy feel that Seikos tend to, but everything lines up as it should. It feels very solid. I think a worthwhile addition cosmetically and in terms of functionality also. So I'm going to leave it there today. I'm going to pat myself on the back for a job well done, and I'm going to sleep soundly tonight knowing that A, I've got a gorgeous SKX to wear in the morning, and B, Alex from Crystaltimes Horology has stopped stabbing his Jody voodoo doll with pins on a daily basis. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.